Up in Pittsburgh, I have my mom and dad who both work in school districts, and my sister Tara, who is 5 years older than me. I played sports. When I went through middle school and high school, I was the class president, loved playing sports, loved having friends, loved doing all the things that middle school and high school included. But there was always something that was a little different from everyone else. I knew something was a little off with me, but I couldn't figure out why. But in 10th grade, I was 16, I was diagnosed with depression. Now, I didn't know what that meant, because I didn't know what the difference was between depressing, depression. I didn't know what it meant, so I didn't take it seriously. I didn't talk about it with my therapist, and be honest. I did not have healthy coping skills that I would use. Instead, I would use a mask. And I would use that mask so that people could see that I was happy, that I was smiling, that I was all these things that people could see on the surface. But underneath, I was struggling every single day. But I didn't know how to talk about it. Going into my senior year of high school, I was constantly having suicidal thoughts. Not questioning whether I want to be here or not, but just questioning what would life be like for other people if I wasn't here. And I said the same thing over and over again. I don't necessarily want to die, but the part of me that has depression, I want that part to die. The part of me that feels sadness, guilt, I want that part to die. And I would go to school just wanting to ignore everyone, wanting to ignore the world, but the one good thing that happened beginning of my senior year is that I played golf and we made the playoffs, so I had to play a practice round, and I was so excited. So I go to play this practice round, my dad picks me up, I'm so excited to get back in the car and tell my dad all about it. But I look over at him and he looks really sad. I asked him, "Dad, what's wrong?" He says, "Nothing, I'm just tired." Now I can understand that, he works at a high school, it's late in the day. I can understand why he might be exhausted. So we get home and I reminded him, "Dad, my car's at school, we have to go pick it up." He said, "No, just go upstairs, Mom's waiting for you." Now I start to panic because my parents and I didn't have that type of relationship where they would just be waiting for me upstairs to see how my day was. We didn't communicate to that level. So I get upstairs, I look at my mom, she's on the couch, and she looks like she's about to cry. So I asked her, "Mom, what's wrong?" She says, "Nothing, I'm just tired." Now my heart starts pounding, questioning, what did I do this time to upset my parents yet again? That's when my dad walked in with a duffel bag full of alcohol that I had hidden in the trunk of my car. And when he dropped that duffel bag in front of me, that was it for me in my mind. Because here I am, their son, and all I do is disappoint them, make them angry, upset. I can tell by the expression on their faces, they don't even want me to be their son anymore. What's the point in being here? If I can't make my mom, my dad, my sister, if I can't make anyone happy, what's the point in being here? So that was the night that I attempted suicide by going out of my 9-story bedroom window. When I hit the ground 100 feet below, I broke my left fibula, I broke my left tibia, I shattered my left femur, I broke my pelvis. When I was flown to the hospital that night, I was induced into a coma for 5 days. I was in the ICU for 2 weeks. Still don't remember one moment of being in that ICU. But I remember when I finally came to and I realized I was in a hospital, I was just trying to figure out what's going on. First thing I noticed is this feeding tube going down my nose. I touch my throat, there's this tube, this trach in my throat, so I can't talk. I literally have no voice. Steel rods coming out of my left leg. My left wrist is wrapped up, like I'm about to go into a boxing match. IV in my arm, hooked up to 3 different monitors, and I have no idea why I'm there. To this day, I don't remember going out my window. I remember everything else leading up to that moment. I remember my class that morning was physics, every hole of golfing that day, the car ride home with my dad, but going out the window, I don't remember. And this was impulsive. I didn't plan my suicide attempt. It wasn't something that I woke up that morning thinking, this is the day I'm going to attempt suicide. But for some reason, when my dad dropped that duffel bag full of alcohol, there was something in my brain saying, I don't belong here anymore. But one night my sister's visiting, and to this day, Tara and I, my sister, remain best friends. So I knew if there was one person that would tell me what happened, and be honest, it was her. So one night it's just us two in my hospital room, and because of the trach, I couldn't talk for 2.5 months. So I look at her and I mouth to her what happened. She starts crying immediately. She looks at me and she says, "You went out of your window." There were so many thoughts, questions that came into my head, but the first is that's impossible. I wouldn't survive a 9-story fall. Even if I did, how drunk was that to accidentally go out the window? Did someone drug me, push me out of my window? What happened? She said, "No one was in the room and you were completely sober." The words suicide attempt didn't even come into my head at that point. Because yeah, I knew I had thoughts of not wanting to be here, questioning what life would be like for other people if I wasn't here, but I never thought I would go through with those emotions, with those feelings. But the one thing that happened being in that hospital is that there was a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper who found out about what happened, emails my dad, and the email simply said, "Mr. Burnham, I heard about your son's suicide attempt. Obviously, it's a very sad and tragic situation that I'm sorry to hear about, but I was wondering, can I interview him? I'm going to China for 2 weeks to work on a story, but please let me know your answer." So the first person my dad talked to is my mom. And my mom said no to this original interview. She thought it was too soon, something I may regret later down the line in life. My therapist at that time thought this was a terrible idea. My sister was on the fence about it, but ultimately they left it up to me. So I remember the morning my dad walked into my hospital room and he starts describing the supporters, being a nice guy, and finally gets around to it. He asked me if I would do this interview. I would tell my story for the first time. And I said yes almost immediately within that first conversation. Because in that moment, I'm the 18-year-old senior in high school, supposed to be running around with all my friends, enjoying my senior year. But in that same moment, I'm the 18-year-old senior in high school, and I'm down to 80 pounds. I can't move, I can't talk. I've been told by doctor after doctor that I would never walk again, that I would never get out of a hospital bed. But I figured by literally spelling out every single word of that interview on an alphabet chart, people on the outside of the hospital can touch the words, "I don't have a voice to say." So whoever reads this article, whoever hears about this story, is never in the position that I'm in right now, lying in this hospital bed. When the story came out in January of 2008, it was incredible, to hear feedback from people who thanks my family for sharing this story. But even during that time period, there were a lot of what ifs in terms of what life would be like after my suicide attempt. Because still in that moment, I was nervous. I was scared that depression, my suicide attempt, might define who I am as a person. But the first thing that I did after graduating high school is share my story. And I shared my story in hopes to make a difference, and hopes to inspire others to be able to share their stories. And when I come to a walk where suicide prevention, mental health awareness is the conversation that's being had, I think of one story. So when I was 23, I was going to speak at a college, and I had a layover in Minnesota. So I am at this bar/restaurant. I get some cheap wings and a beer, which becomes relevant in a second. So there was an older gentleman that was sitting to the right of me who had his glasses on. He was writing something, he was very studious. And after a few minutes, he looked over at me and he said, "Who do you think is gonna win the Super Bowl?" Because it was the day of the Super Bowl. So we started talking about football, of course. And during that time, it was great. We laughed, had great conversation. And right before he gets up to leave, he looks at the server and says, "The young man's meal is on me." Oh, I said, "Thank you, sir. I truly appreciate that. But of course, just pay it forward." Puts on his hat, puts on his coat, goes to walk away. But before he does, he says, "Hey, I forgot to ask you, what do you do for a living?" I said, "Well, I speak on mental health and suicide prevention." This man takes off his coat, takes off his hat. He sits down in front of me, and for 10 minutes, he talks about how he and his sister saw their grandfather take his own life right in front of them. What it was like for him trying to support two sisters who were in and out of recovery and sobriety. Some of the trauma that he had gone through and experienced. And for 10 minutes, I didn't say anything, I just listened. After 10 minutes goes by, he says, Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. Can we please exchange business cards? Maybe we can keep in touch. Then, of course. When he goes off, he goes to catch his plane. I look down at his business card, and he's the CEO of a very successful business. And the first thought in my mind was, he could have bought me more than like wings and a beer. Like out of all the times to not order filet mignon, but in that moment, here he is, the CEO. Here I am, 23-year-old, just going around speaking at school, but for 10 minutes, we were two people talking about suicide, having a conversation about suicide. And I think that is what the point and the purpose is of having walks like this today and having events like this today. I share my story because I do not want the conversation of suicide to be silenced, ignored, or stigmatized. And that's why I'm so happy that I can share my story with all of you today. And I encourage you to keep that conversation going and to use your voices as well. So, thank you, everyone.